Okay, morning to everyone that's in the chat. Thank you for giving up your time this morning, coming along. When I was asked to do this, it was I wanted to try and talk to people about something that I get asked a lot about as a tutor. It's very often the case that people ask about their young players not passing enough, dribbling too much, vice versa, all the rest of it. So throughout the morning, if you've got a point or if you've got something that you want to say, then do please feel free to interrupt, put your hand up and try and get your question answered. Like I say, it's just it seems to be quite divisive, this topic, so I just wanted to talk about it and give a few suggestions. That's the other thing as well, that this is, from my point of view, this is talking about some of my own coaching beliefs and my philosophy. That might not match up with all of yours, and there's not a one size fits all with this at all, like many things in football coaching. So feel free to get yourself involved and we'll get going. I'd like to say, can I ask a lot of you to try and mull things over and think about things anyway. So Rich, if we can get started, get on that first slide. If you can try and start to use the chat function in this, what I want you to just take a couple of seconds to think about is how, as coaches, do you feel about your players when it comes to passing and dribbling? Because, as I say, it always comes up, always comes up on courses and in CPD events, things like that, about the delicate balancing act about when players pass and dribble. So how do you guys feel about it? Let's get the chat going. There's a few of you in here this morning, so let me know your thoughts on it, and we can revisit that as we go through the presentation. The presentation this morning is for you lot, and it will take as long as you want it to take to see how we get on. Good. We've got, so Ryan, it's good decision making, absolutely. We've got, I love to see them take players on. It's down to their decision making. Better players will dribble and try to score, often not giving others time on the ball. Okay, so Kevin's brought up one of the more regular questions that we get. I'll never stop a player from dribbling, but try to help them use it to benefit the team. Okay. Love when players dribble, players change the game. Be a good individual before you can become a good teammate. Interesting. Rich, looks like you've already got a hand up. Happy to take questions as and when.
Yeah, no problem. Robert, you right just to unmute yourself, please? If I'm not sure, it's just that there's a little microphone thing on your screen there. If you just click that to unmute yourself, you should be able to talk.
I pressed the hand by mistake. No problem.
Oh, no problem.
Oh, is that Bob? Is it?
It is, yes.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Morning.
Good. Okay, not to worry. Lots and lots of good points in there. Asif's point's a really good one as well. Be a good individual before you can become a good teammate. I quite like the idea of that. I like to see players driving space. I've always encouraged players to dribble so they can learn the skill. Yeah, if someone has good ability to dribble, coach them to improve their technique. Okay. And there is Bob, who says, I prefer to prioritise teams, so prefer passing, which is the interesting part where we go about what it is to pass and what sort of positions you need to find yourselves in to be able to pass. So we'll get onto that a bit later, but that's nice. Good. Some good comments there. We'll refer back to them. Rich, if you go to the next slide for us, please. And that basically what we've been saying. If you have any questions, obviously related to the subject, then please do feel free to put your hand up or put anything in the chat and ask the questions. But what's always useful is relating this to particular players or situations that you have. So please do feel free to ask it relating to your team. We'll try to give you some suggestions as to where you can go with it. But next slide, please, Rich. For me, this is the key to this, and you guys as individual coaches, there's no magic formula in terms of being able to say when should you pass, when should you dribble, because that will cause all sorts of debate in terms of individual situations. That will link to your coaching philosophy, and you need to consider that when you give information to your players. So if you're saying to a player, I don't want you to dribble in that situation, you need to make sure that that is linked closely to your coaching philosophy. At any point, if you've said, for example, I would like to help develop creative players, and yet you ask them not to dribble or take players on, you need to consider how that could be a possible clash. Elliot, I feel like you're a bit of a disciple of this at times. Best passes in the game are normally best on the ball too. Busquets, De Jong, Pirlo. There's lots that I've got coming up on that, so we'll stick with that. The first bit there, in terms of your considerations, is long-term player development. So again, a massive consideration to think about what it is that you build. So one of you put on there a second ago that I think about the team before any individuals. What are those individuals potentially missing out on if the focus is purely on passing and not on a number of different things at any one time? I'm just going to read yours. A 1 under 12 player, great dribble, but head down, beating players, and then takes on one too many when someone is in a better position. How can we coach releasing the ball at the right time, decision making? Okay, we'll get to that a little bit later as well. In terms of what I've got is a few questions, and the first bit hopefully a little bit thought provoking, and then by the time we get to the end, I'll give you some session suggestions and stuff. So, Rich, can we get on to the next slide for us? So this brings it into that question there. It's all about giving the players the opportunity to make decisions. Revert back to the long-term player development, and if you feel like you are going down one route or the other. If I refer to my own coaching philosophy now, I don't want my players to only be able to do one or the other. The ultimate thing for me will be that they can recognise what the right decision is, when to do it. It's an interesting one when you say, and it's probably the most common issue, I have a player that takes on one too many. So how do we speak about their decision making? For me, that will probably be reducing format. So if you, in fact, if we have a little chat about that, it's a really good time to probably bring that up. So would Peter be able to come on and talk about his under 12 player a little bit?
Yeah, good morning.
Morning, how are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Good. Yeah, you done my level 1 a bit while ago. Last year.
Excellent.
Now it'd be good to get playing again. Yeah, so this under 12 guy is also does a bit of training with Reading Academy, so yeah, he's quite a good player. And over the past season or 3/4 of season, he has got 12 assists and 13 goals, so he is getting a little bit better with that passing. But there was all that time where he thinks, no, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to carry on dribbling. I'm going to carry on dribbling. And it's I keep trying to say to him, well, look, he's over there. Pass to him. Can you not do this? Can you not do that? Try and get him to think, to put his head up a little bit more. Cross the ball, square the ball. That sort of stuff. But
what position does this player sort of find himself in?
We normally play him in the number 10, so just behind the striker.
Okay. Just so that I can have in context, 12 assists and 13 goals sounds like a lot to me. Is that was that up there with the top in your team, or is that sort of average?
It's second, yeah. Well, for assists and combined, it's up there. We've got one guy who scored more. But yeah, for combined assists and goals, then yeah, he's top.
So for me, I wouldn't be overly concerned about that at the moment. Those the fact that he's assisted so much as well seems to me that means he is doing it, he's passing it, and not only that, crucially playing the passes that matter, because he's been able to assist goals. It's interesting that you say he was at Reading's academy. Is he not there anymore?
He is part-time, yeah, but I don't know. He seems to be with us. He seems to be with Phil. He seems to be with Reading Academy. He seems to be splitting his time across 3 or 4 different things. So he's probably getting different coaching methods from different people, which probably confuses matters as well.
There's a philosophy at Reading with their youngest players called, I don't know if they still do it actually, but they used to do me and my ball. So it was very you learning to manipulate the ball from a young age. So he's probably been influenced by that at some point through his development. But for me, I wouldn't at this stage be worried, because if that's 12 or 13 assists, there must be other times where he's tried to play the pass, but the player didn't score.
I think there's just a little bit more that we can get out of him, and it's just now that we've got to that level, it's how can we get that little extra 10%, 20% out of him to consistently make those good decisions.
There'll also be the element of reducing the format in training, so it reduces the amount of decisions that he can make. So if you still do, even at under 12s, little 2v2 and 3v3 games, then he's in that situation where he can either beat 1, 2 or 3 and then be in front of goal. So that would reduce it down. You'd be able to speak to him individually about particular things that happen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good.
No problem. So just for everyone on that, and it'll come up a little bit later, if you reduce the format and continue, because under 12 is still in theory a foundation phase age, so still looking at playing 3v3s, 2v2s, 3v2s, 2v1s, then players will have more and more opportunity to make those decisions in those types of formats. And as a result, hopefully the answers that you gain from it, i.e. you're able to observe what they do in certain situations and talk to the players about why it was that they made those decisions, that's where you'll get lots and lots of returns in terms of their decision making. That's whoever. Where's Elliot? Is there such a thing as beating too many players? How will we get a Hazard or a Messi? I think it's still. I think, Elliot, you know my opinion on it, which will be to let them go and try and create that English Hazard, English Messi. It's difficult because we're saying if they beat 2 players but then got tackled by the third, have they tried to take on too many players? And I think that's where we get the bit going. Where Elliot, unmute yourself just for a second.
Hello,
Elliot, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. How would you deal with a player that's beat 2 players but gets tackled by the third when possibly there was a pass on?
For me, I don't like to separate dribbling and passing. I just think it's all about space. So if my player thinks he's got the ability to beat 3 players and the space is there to do it, I'll never say to them, you should have passed, because if they thought they could get through, but I will always try to say, why couldn't you go forward any further? And they might then say, obviously, I didn't have space. And I was like, so where do you think the space might be? And then so you're not telling them to pass. You're just telling them that if you can't go forwards, it might be that you need to then share the ball. But I will never discourage a player from trying to beat three, especially at under 8 or under 9, because at the end of the day, if you lose the ball at under 9 and concede a goal, who cares?
Yeah.
That's not going to matter in 10 years' time. But if
Yeah.
I tell an 8-year-old that he shouldn't beat 3 players, that might stay with him for the rest of his life. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you broke it down to the most fundamental of rules, I can't remember if I mentioned it earlier, you'd say if you've got space in front of you, dribble. If you haven't, pass it. But then you would take away any element of trying to take on players, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Which is the difficulty, which is where we come back to the practices that you use in training to try and get players to recognise what the best option is. So that player, that fine balancing act, and you're absolutely right when you talk about an under 8 or an under 9 in terms of actually we're just going to praise that they had a go at that. They've tried to beat 3 players. It didn't quite work. But if we take away the options and start to say, listen, there was someone to pass to, so you should always pass, then again you're taking away those decisions, aren't you?
Yeah, and then they might then be programmed to, oh, I'm not going to try and do that again because last time I tried to do that, I was told off. So now every time I'm going to look for a pass, which then may be the right decision. But now you've taken away that child's unique ability. So I always think when they're younger, you want to give them as many options as possible. So let them try and be that player that can go past 3 players. Because I guarantee you, most of the people on here, when they're watching a game of football, who's the player you're always drawn towards? Mm-hmm. So like later on today, Dortmund, everyone's going to be watching Sancho when he gets the ball. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because he's the one that's going to go past 3 players. But then if you want those type of players, then don't limit them when they're under 8.
Yeah, that's always the case, isn't it? It's like say to people, who's the greatest English player ever? Gascoigne will get mentioned immediately, and he was so exciting to watch. He's taken players on, takes the ball in difficult situations, and so on and so forth. So
when I was the other day, sorry to butt in, when you watch him as well in a full game, the amount of times he makes an awful decision or loses the ball or tries something stupid, but that's what he was, and that. But if you'd have stopped him doing those things, then he wouldn't have been the player he was.
I even watched, as a ridiculous caveat to this, I watched Harry's Heroes in the week, and for me, best player on the pitch by a country mile was Paul Merson. And it's when he picks the ball up, his first thought is, I'm going to drive forwards. It doesn't really matter what's in front of him because he thinks he can beat them. Equally, it was one of the games they played. I think his mistakes in the middle of the pitch cost England a couple of goals. But you have to be okay with it because that refers back again to your coaching philosophy, doesn't it? If you've said that's how I want to develop creative players, risk-taking players, independent decision makers, which are a lot of the buzz terms that we get as coaches, this is what I want to try and do, then if we're telling them to pass all the time, we're restricting that development. Cheers, Elliot. Thank you very much. I think looks to me like Bob. We need to get Bob on. Bob, can you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Bob, good morning. How are you?
Yes, good.
Excellent. I'm feeling like you're the one in the background at the moment going, oh, this makes me uncomfortable.
No, I pretty much agree with everything that's being said and typed there. I think all I'm trying to say with my comment is a way to develop and mature the players is to sort of continue to reinforce that it is a team game, and and that there's always options available. Yes, you can dribble and you can take it on, and if you've got the space, that's great as well. But equally, continue to reiterate there's passing, there may be passing options. You've got other players in the team.
Yeah. And
to continually reinforce that point of view. I think also from a coaching perspective, and I'm assuming that everyone on here is our grassroots coaches. We sort of have a responsibility for all the players in the team, and we know what it's like when one player might hog the ball and try to beat 5 players and without passing it, etc. The other players get upset. So it's about helping to look after them as well,
Okay.
to ensure that everyone gets involved.
Good. What I'm going to do, because there's a really lovely little debate raging in the chat. Bob, if you put yourself back on mute, thanks for that. We've got Asif, who also I think has come up with quite a nice response to that. So if Asif wants to come on and have a little make his little point there to Bob's original statement.
Hello.
Asif, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very good. You're not out running this morning?
Nah, not today.
I quite like your response regarding decision making. Would you mind going through a few bits like that for some of the other people looking as well?
It's just a couple of things. So I think one of the first things, in terms of the way looking at it is, if you look at a child's schooling and learning, and everything they'll do up until the age of, say, 21 will be around them as an individual and them improving themselves as an individual. And then we expect them to go into a team environment of work. And generally, people seem to manage with that transition quite well. Yeah. Because they've developed those individual skills, which go into a larger part. So it's that sort of just thinking about that analogy and how that looks like on a football pitch or in a different learning environment. And also, I think somebody mentioned on there about making the right decision. And with that, I think it's important to understand that the right decision is a subjective view. So, and that will depend on, like, you and me could look at the same thing and both have a different view of what's right, and that'll be based on our own experiences, the players' experiences, where they're at in their stage of development, what the environment is.
So for me, in that it varies on, and you're absolutely right, very subjective. But what's important to think about is is that player that we deem has taken on one too many. If there was a pass on, the point of it is probably that there was someone with a better goal scoring opportunity. Would you say that's probably what we're alluding to a lot of the time, or it's very base level? We had a better chance of keeping the ball, I suppose. Yeah. So in which case, that's probably erring on the focus of being successful in the game, i.e. caring about the result, rather than also caring about that individual's development, isn't it? So that individual has just developed. They've learned something, haven't they? Even if they took on one too many, they've developed, they've learned something. We don't need to worry too much that maybe they took someone on in the box when they had someone square that could have had a shot. That these are lessons and little cognitive memories that hopefully that player will build up in time. But what we don't want is for them to not have the technical ability to take the player on.
Exactly, yeah, definitely. And I think I've just while you were talking there, I just thought, like, as an Arsenal fan, we always get accused of trying to walk the ball into the goal. Yeah. And that's sort of like the far extreme of, when people talk about, oh, if you just do dribbling, people are going to hog the ball. Yeah. Well, if you haven't got that element, then you're just going to be looking for that pass every time rather than taking that gamble and taking that risk.
There was that great clip recently, since Christmas, let's say, of David Silva in front of goal passing. Did you see that?
Yeah. And
it was like, I didn't quite get it. I put a little funny thing on Twitter saying, I wonder if he's on the 10 passes before you can score rule, sort of thing. And it was like, why has he passed the ball there? Like that was a shot all day long, wasn't it? So yeah, I get it. And this is the thing. Ultimately, there's a balance to be had here, which sounds like a fluffy answer, but it's not. Ultimately, you need players that are technically able to dribble and beat players, but we need players that can also eventually, and this is what probably comes a little bit later, is recognise the right opportunities to share the ball, pass the ball, or whatever other element that we're discussing in the game. But we must try and have both. We must try and make sure that they have opportunities to make decisions whilst not stunting the technical development to be able to perform a skill to beat a player. But no, thanks for that. That was good. David, it went on a while ago. The chat's gone on whilst we've been speaking. But if David could unmute himself, it's a really interesting point where you say, Mick, do you see playing and coaching philosophy are different, but related to one another? If David could come on, that'd be good to talk about for a little bit.
Yeah. Good morning,
David. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So it's a really interesting one. What I see the differences between the two, and of course they are related, is if you've got a playing philosophy, sometimes they could butt heads is all that could happen. So if your coaching philosophy within it is to say, I'm going to develop creative players, but then your playing philosophy is to be very defensively compact, not take many risks, then the two can butt heads. Does that make sense?
No, that's exactly what I was trying to kind of allude to. That that they kind of have to go together. Well, most of the time at least, they have to sort of match up. Otherwise, as you say, they're gonna.
There's no rule without exception, and sometimes you'll always have to have trade-offs and compromises in football. But yeah, it's a really, really good point that ultimately, if you're committing to things like, we want to develop a creative player, an exciting player, I want to play attacking football, for example, it fits and filters quite nicely into, well, that's going to include encouraging dribbling.
Yeah, exactly. And then it might be that, as you're talking about making correct decisions, then it might be correct for that player to try and take on three, even though maybe because they have to develop the dribbling skills, maybe there is a player in a better position.
Yeah.
But that's an opportunity for them to go for it. And if you continue time to go for it, but then but don't go for it now because with 3-2 down, we need then as you say, it clashes.
Absolutely. So it's just important to make sure that you think quite hard and heavily about what your playing philosophy is matched in with your coaching philosophy. But great point. Thanks for that, David.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Rich, can we go on to the next slide, please? This has come up in the chat already, and anyone is free to put their hand up and discuss and get themselves involved in the debate. This is something that is quite close to my heart in terms of trying to define what we mean and what we're looking for out of a dribbler or a passer. My viewpoint on it would be that if I'd have asked that question right at the start, or if I asked it certainly to a bunch of fresh-faced level 1 coaches, is that they would describe Sergio Busquets as an excellent passer of the ball. He sits in there, he wins it, he gives it to someone else. In the same way, and again, there was a little clip on Twitter recently, in the same way that we've described Pirlo as an excellent passer. But for me, if you delve into those players much more closely and dependent upon, and we'll get onto it in the next slides, dependent upon what you actually define dribbling as, you'll realise that those players in the centre of the pitch especially have to be excellent dribblers. So, Rich, can we go on to the next one, please? What I'd like you to do, and I'm going to just watch the chat box for a second without really saying a lot, is can you define what dribbling is? I like Andy's point there on dribbles, but very disciplined positioning. And that's fine as well. So maybe it's a case of choosing what areas he does it in, or maybe he has to just do it in the hardest area possible anyway, which is the centre of the pitch where it's most congested and where you're most at risk when you lose the ball. So Liam's definition of dribbling there, good. Let's get a few more in if you can. Keeping possession of the ball, small controlled movements of the ball to evade danger, like it. The ability to beat a player, ball at your feet in a 1v1 situation. The ability to retain possession whilst looking. Okay, good. What we've already got there is a couple where, for me, there's this sort of traditional idea of what dribbling is, which I think in our minds at times is it's a 1v1, possibly in a wide area, to beat a player to cross or shoot or something, which is, it's a version of dribbling. But for me, a dribbling session would be slightly different to, say, doing a 1v1 session. I think there's different aspects of it. Those of you that I've done a course with, you'll probably have seen me go on about this anyway. But the definition of dribbling for me is that ability to keep the ball in tight areas, and it's what we'll always come out of a World Cup or a Euros and we'll say we're missing. A Modric is another one, player of the last World Cup. He can have 3-4 players around him, and he can keep the ball until it's right to pass it, and then he chooses a fantastic pass as well. It's not always the safe pass. It's not always backwards. He can manipulate the ball, move it from side to side, twist and turn, use his body to fall and evade other players around him, but whilst using multiple touches, using multiple surfaces of his foot to find space, to find a great pass. And then if he's sucked in maybe 2 or even 3 players around him, his team can play off that. Hassan, is that if you want to come in, mate, and and talk to me about that.
Hi, mate. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Yourself?
Good. Yeah, good. Is that would that not be protecting the ball aimed at what I was just saying about Modric?
Yeah, I was just thinking because like the way I've been taught how to dribble, and the way my coaches have taught me how to coach my players.
Yeah.
Like, what would be the difference between dribbling, running with the ball, and protecting the ball? If you're just staying in the same place and just keeping possession, is that dribbling because there's no progression into next phases and you're not going up the pitch?
It's a good point. It's a good debate to bring up. For me, the key there is that Modric would be moving at this point. So if we go down a route of like what is we say protecting the ball, he is protecting the ball, but I think there might be a slight bit of confusion there with dribbling, twisting from side to side, moving from side to side, twisting, turning, evading players, and then shielding the ball, which is to stick your bum out, arm out, foot on the ball, keep it away, safe side, all that sort of stuff. For me, that you're right. There might be a little bit of there might be a crossover at times. He might have to stand still for a split second, but what he'll then do is likely drop a shoulder, a tiny little step over, a Cruyff, even a fake here, there, and everywhere to move the ball again to evade a player. So there's a difference. The other thing that you mentioned there, running with the ball for me is very different to dribbling, and they would be 2 different sessions simply because of size of touches. So dribbling would be small touches. You'd be keeping that very, very close to protect the ball. There's lots of chat in there on the side talking about protecting the ball, and is dribbling a form of protection, which I agree with. Running with the ball would probably be that bit where you say there's space and grass in front of me. My touch might be really quite big because I'm going to put it in there and be able to get there. Does that make sense? Does that clear it up? Or?
Yeah, slightly. It's just I'm trying to comprehend it and put it on a pitch. So if I was Pep Guardiola, let's say you got John Stones at the back and he's got the ball, and he's bringing up the ball. He looks towards his left. Okay, he drops the shoulder. He turns right. But that motion of dropping the shoulder, it would be different as if a player was coming to him, pressing him. He would drop the shoulder in a different way than if he was free to do it. So if it was Modric in a pitch, would dribbling be okay? There has to be a player there for me to act in a certain way, because if the player wasn't there, I would act in a completely different way.
I still have both of those down as dribbling for me. John Stones isn't taking massive touches in that situation. He's driving into space, probably keeping it quite close. And as he's faced with a player, if he's going to use a shift or a drop of the shoulder or a feint to beat that player, that for me is still dribbling. He's possibly added one element of like a 1v1 in there, but he's still dribbling in the same way for me that Modric is in the middle of the pitch, or Busquets, or Elliot's just put Xavi and Iniesta again. For me, two of the best dribblers that have ever been around, but they'd be often labelled as two of the best passers ever around. They are, but they're great dribblers as well. The running with the ball for me is different. That's where it becomes different, because you have that space in front of you to just hit the ball into and chase it, and you are running after it, not necessarily dribbling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so.
Cool. Thank you very much. Brilliant, brilliant. Let's see if we've got anything else here. So we've got Asif as well. What have we got? I think there's a misconception about what passing teams do. Watch it yet. Absolutely. And what we've done, which is nice, is try to dispel the myth that to be a possession-based team, it's all about passing. You need fantastic dribblers if you are to become a possession-based team, because we have to handle the ball under pressure. We have to be able to take the ball, keep it in tight areas before then sucking in defenders and sucking in the opposition to then put someone else in a good position. So it's nice that that's coming out in the chat, because I think that's a bit of a myth that needs dispelling. Rich, can we go on to the next slide for us, please? Right, hope everyone can see that. Got a few bits and bobs now, a couple of slides left before we just get into any other questions that anyone's got. Based purely on, this is a session that I came up with. I don't know if there's anyone in the chat that's done this session with me. I can't remember what groups I've done it with, but I've actually evolved this session as well since the last time I demonstrated it. So for me, this is a great one to try and get those decision-making processes involved. So we've got a game involved. So whether you're doing under 8s, or whether this is a men's first team, women's first team, what you've got is a pitch. You've got, in that particular example, because it was for older players, we've got 6 boxes marked out in the middle third of a pitch. In those 6 boxes, we've got a 3v3. When it's free play, those 6 players in there, the 3v3, they can go wherever they want. It's when they receive the ball in midfield that we start to put a few little constraints on them in order to get our dribbling, our passing out, our decision making. If you wanted to use this to just promote dribbling, the way I've done it before was that if we've got that example there where the red goalkeeper has to play into the defender, you've got a 1v1. If they then play that into the red 4, and the red 4 finds themselves in that square, they are not allowed to pass out of that square. This is if you wanted to just work, this is where if you wanted to work on just the dribbling element, and this reflects on all those conversations we've just had with your Modric, your Xavi, your Iniesta, those ones in there that can twist and turn, the Busquets. What I've done since is you've got the option of passing, but only if you can pass first time. So if you've got the red 5 plays into the 4, the 4 needs to be aware that if he could hit the 8, the 10, or the 9 first time, he can do it. However, if they have to take an extra touch because they're being closed down, and in the game you would allow 2 of the blue midfielders to be able to close them down, if he has to take the extra touch, he now needs to get himself out of that box, either backwards, can go back to defence, or forwards before they can pass. What what it does is gives the players, they have to be aware. They have to be aware what's around them. It was alluded to earlier in the conversation. They need to find space so that when they receive, they've got a picture. You can work on that body shape to receive so that they know what's going on in front of them. They're not thinking about what's going. They need to know what's going on in front of them and behind them. If they find themselves under pressure, or they've taken that extra touch, or their first touch wasn't brilliant, and they find themselves closed down 2v1, then we're in the situation where we're twisting, turning, changing direction to evade and possibly get themselves out of that box before they can pass to someone else. What we've got as well is on the level 2, talk about on, around, away. So you've got the player on the ball, and then we're thinking about our 8 and our 10 trying to get into a position around the player on the ball to find space to be able to receive the ball should the 4 be able to get themselves out of that tricky area. And then away, what's the 9 thinking, or even the 5 to get it back at some point in terms of being played to? So there's so many elements there in terms of decision making. Elliot did do this session. Love to show that to be honest. As soon as you beat that first player, you open the whole pitch up. Okay. Elliot, could you just come on and talk about the way that you chop the pitch up? Did you still use 6 boxes? How many players aside? All the rest of it?
Hi, yeah, I just depending on the age group. So if it's like say under 7 group, you maybe just split it into 4, so it's easy for them. And you just, whenever they get the ball, they have to try and escape the box they're in.
Yeah.
And it just forces them for that first option isn't just control and pass it, which you see quite a lot.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of players are almost programmed to control pass before the pressures even come.
Yeah.
And often that just means it gets cut out because they know exactly what you're going to do. Whereas if a younger player receives it in the first box and they can somehow outplay that first one, I always remember when we did this session, you said, look, as soon as you beat one player, another player has to jump out.
Yeah.
So, for example, if the 4 in this picture drives inside diagonally, their number 4 is going to have to come towards you.
Yeah.
And that opens up a pass to the 9 or 10.
Yeah,
obviously,
exactly.
The younger players, you just simplify it, so you just go 3v3 or 4v4, and it's still the same principle, but you're just doing it with less players. And then, like you said, it can also challenge those players that maybe aren't the best dribblers who struggle to dribble. You might just say, well, how can your first touch leave the box?
Yeah.
So rather than having, you may not be the best dribbler, but you might be a player that's able to take a good first touch and then play a pass. So it kind of accommodates all abilities, but it just gives them different challenges. So yeah, I've adapted it and I still use it now.
Good. Nice to hear. What I like about the session as well is that for those that are on the fence of like, we don't want to promote too much dribbling. The reason to dribble in this is to get a pass off. So the reason you dribble and you try to beat the player is for that domino effect to happen, where if the 4 receives the ball and manages to evade a player, get past a player, beat a player, whichever way round they do it, then there's a domino effect there because he's left the 8, say, for dead, which means the 10 or the 4 needs to go and close, which opens up a passing line space for one of your players. And that's the point that we're trying to make, where we've got those players in midfield that hold on to the ball in order to create space for a teammate, so that they can pass it to them. So it's just a session that has worked for me to have those 2 bits aligned. But great. Is there any questions? Has anyone got anything on that session? Anything they need explaining? Anything that's not particularly clear before we move on to the last bit? At those younger ages, they maybe can't play the longer passes, so dribbling to that's important. Yeah, exactly that. So David, you're right. Can't necessarily play the longer ball in that particular game. I wouldn't allow. It would be a restriction for them that the 5 can't play into the 9, for example. So you have to go through midfield. Is there anyone else that has any questions on that session in any way? Nope. Cool. If we move on to the next one then, Rich. So last little bit from me before there's just any questions. These are just simple formats that we can use in training when we're doing our coaching sessions that will help players understand the different areas and the different ways in which we can either dribble or pass. So, for example, you can have on the left hand side there, you've got two pitches. If they're split into thirds, that middle zone can be either a no dribble zone or a no pass zone. So if we go the easiest one to start with, the promotion of dribbling. If we've got the middle zone, if you find yourself in that zone, you are not allowed to pass out of it, then again, it's those players needing to find space and a good area, a good first touch to be able to dribble out of it. They need to be aware of what's going on around them in all directions, because if you're being marked tight, you might need to take a touch backwards towards your own defence again and play it out that way. In the same way with the no dribble zone, you have players that when they receive the ball, within reason, they're not allowed to dribble, they must pass away as well. So they're going to need to find themselves in space again. They're going to need to know where they want the ball to go next. And they're going to need to think about, I'm probably not going to be able to take 3, 4, 5 touches here. This is going to be a pass that I need to make. First time, maybe I can control it and then pass it before being closed down and find it very, very difficult. What you can have with it as well, because I'm normally a big advocate of reward, don't restrict. So if you've said that you can't do something, then maybe reward what you're asking them to do. So for example, if you've managed to dribble through that zone and then you score, maybe that goal's worth 3, etc., etc. So just finding a way of rewarding it, what it is that you want out of it. So I think as adults, we also assume that players can see what we can from the sideline, and most will probably only be able to focus on what's in close proximity. And that's it. It's you need them to be able to do that, though. They do need to be able to focus on the little intricacies around them, not always worrying about the bigger picture, because you still want them to be able to take those touches under pressure. Good. The other bit there, in terms of small-sided formats and overloads and underloads, if when you're in your training sessions, you do this as often as possible, whatever age groups it is, then this is going to really, really accelerate the decision-making process, because your games, even 11-a-side games, are made up of small battles, whether that's 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v2s, probably no more, in my opinion, than a 3v3 in one section of the pitch at any one time. So you need to replicate that, and this will involve then, on the ball, I've got limited options. Do I pass the ball? Can I dribble? Can I take on players? It might be higher up the pitch, you've got a cross or a shooting option as well. But as soon as you reduce the formats and make it small like that, then that's where players can really work on their decision making. If you've got a 3v2, for example, it's going to be an advantage at times to do that running with the ball. You might be able to shift the ball to your one player that's in space that can take one big touch and then shoot. When you've got the 2v1, you might be the one that wins the ball, and therefore your only real option at that point is you're going to need to attempt to keep it and take on 2 players. So you've got lots and lots of different formats. I think that so Elliot's point there, exactly, we may see a simple pass, they may see a nutmeg and finish. And I think I saw it on the chat earlier as well. We've all been there, haven't we, where you go, oh, pass it, don't do that, don't take him on. And then the next bit is like, oh, good goal, or whatever it is. Sometimes just try to bite your tongue a little bit and see how things play out. Before you actually have to intervene with a player, the chances are we need to see that they're making the wrong decision on a consistent basis, not just the one. So you must allow for players to still do it. I had a great conversation with a coach yesterday that spoke about his team took a kickoff. This was academy football as well, and it was a local derby sort of thing. And they took kickoff right at the start of the game, and it went down to their right back, who played a long ball down the line, which wasn't necessarily part of the coaching philosophy. Now, at that point, coach could have said, what are you doing? What are your other options? All that sort of thing. He didn't. He left him to it for that first period of time, that first 20 minutes. And the boy was just nervous. And that's why he got rid of it initially. He settled into the game and then got going and played the way that they've been working on playing. So it's really important at times that we leave players to make their own decisions. David, I've done a bit of research with coaches and their decisions to intervene. It seems good coaches and players to self-correct. Maybe intervene after 3 or 4 poor decisions. I also have something to say. If you keep asking the player to do what you want, you will limit their potential. Exactly that. And it's such a great point. We have to allow the players to learn for themselves. We can't continue to just give them the answers. And the debate will rage with passing versus dribbling. What we've said this morning isn't going to please everyone. But for me, it's all centered around the decision-making process and allowing for the players to notice what they do and why, and for them to be able to justify why, not necessarily you, the coach. That is the end of my presentation. Rich, what did you want to do from here? Any questions?
Yeah, mate, bit of Q&A. There's been some great interactions though. So firstly, Mick, thank you. But yeah, if you've got any questions around this topic, as there've been so many already, just hand up or chat away. But yeah, I enjoyed that, Mick. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
Lots of interactions. Most interactive sessions we've had, I think.
Yeah, lots on there, wasn't there? Which was really good. Nice to see people getting involved. It was one of those where you said, "Oh, can you do another CPD?" I wanted to do something a bit provocative because it's always a question that comes up. So really, really good to see people getting involved. And you can see that there is, even with myself, to be honest, at times, still a lack of clarity as to where you're at with it. Sort of like, oh, should they have passed then? Was that the right thing? And lots to be learned, and probably never going to quite get it right. But as long as the interventions are focused on the player, that's as close as we can get.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Elliot's asked the question there. It says dribbling can be pressure from behind, the side, or the front. How important do you think it is to coach before and after actions as well as the middle bit?
Where's that, sorry?
Like 3 up. 10:57.
10:57. Right. Oh, okay. Dribbling can be pressure from behind the side of it. How important do you think it is to coach before and after actions as well as the middle bit? So that was that session that we did on the course, Elliot. One of the nice bits of the coaching points with that is observing how the player controls the ball and where their first touch goes. So what we'll have within doing that is the before, the middle, and the after bit. So if you remember, the 2 options really are the player will know if they've got pressure from behind them because they'll take their touch in front of them, or even sole of the foot start to protect the ball initially. If they take that type of touch and there's no one behind them, they haven't looked. Equally, if they don't look behind them and there is trouble, if they are under pressure behind them and they take a touch that allows for the ball to go across their body and they get tackled, they haven't looked. And you can flip that on its head as well, where you take the defensive type touch without anyone behind you, and therefore you haven't looked because you can't go forward. So it's one of those where there's actually quite a nice little element there where, judging on the player's first touch, you can almost tell whether they have observed. Hopefully that answers it. Is that all right, Elliot?
Yeah. Thanks, Mick.
No problem.
Excellent. Steve says, once could be an anomaly, twice could be coincidence, thrice is a habit. I only get involved if it's a habit. To a previous question. But there's no more questions at the moment, apart from David, but I think he's asking Steve how he did that. But as Steve said, interesting point. Saw something after last Euros that said over 80% of 1v1 start with a player in possession, having his back to the other player. But do we incorporate that into our 1v1 work?
So there's lots on that, which is a really, really interesting point. It would be one of those where I'm sure the most common 1v1 practice we do is player has the ball and they're just going to dribble straight at another player in order to take them on, and that's your 1v1. But as it's bang on in terms of a lot of the time we receive under pressure, possibly with the pressure behind us, and it's up to us to take those touches that we've been discussing in here and try and encourage the players to take those touches where they're shifting, twisting, turning, and getting themselves faced up again for a 1v1. So no, really, really, really good point. Peter's got a question there. Rich, yeah, do this, I don't know whether the slides get shared.
This recording will go on YouTube and our website, so in the next couple of days, Peter, and to everyone, so you'll be able to just pause it and take down some more notes there.
Cool.
Well, we just wait for a couple more questions. Thanks, Steve. Just a couple of things coming up. As I say, you've probably seen this lots of everyone, but Football Stay Now, go to FA Learning on YouTube, lots and lots of content on there. And we just released a mental health awareness podcast as well this week, 4 specials, those guys there. So really interesting listens and different perspective. Ahead of Series 3, which comes out Thursday. And coming up for the next couple of days, we've got Adam Colley, Manning Up the Surgery, a podcast live with QPR technical director Chris Ramsey, which will be good. And I know we're recording episode of the panel, aren't we, Mick? England's greatest 11.
Thursday, yeah. The debate will rage on.
So that will come out in a few days after that. And then next Saturday, Adam is doing CPD. But I see there's a couple more questions as well just coming in here, Mick.
Yeah, no problem. Asif, any suggestions for dealing with parents who get annoyed with other kids hogging the ball? I think that's, as long as you've got your coaching philosophy and your playing philosophy, as alluded to earlier, that's hopefully as well been shared with the parents at the start, then that's the answer, really, isn't it? Make sure that they're well aware at the start of the season that this is how you plan to develop your players. If you are trying to develop creative players, independent decision makers, then they have to be able to make those decisions about how long they hold on to the ball for. So it's for the long-term good of the individual's development.
Okay. Andy Cox asked a question there, Mick, as well. Dribbling, crossing at pace is a general problem in our team. Crosses normally end up aimed at our goalkeeper or behind the goal. How do you coach this?
Game related again. Probably channels down the side of the pitch and allow for them to do it unopposed to start with. So maybe you have to build up in the middle of the pitch. You've got some wide players that are unopposed in the channels. Talk about the pass, because that might be the problem at that. So pass hopefully aimed in front of them for them to be able to run on and cross. And then gradually, as they get better at it, allow for them to be opposed after one touch, and then take the channels away so that they have to do it under pressure.
Cool, and we also have to get him to cross into the second 6-yard box as well.
That's the thing. Crossing's a massive. There's a massive amount of work to do with crossing, because your cross, dependent upon your area of the pitch, is interesting. If you're at the byline, you're likely to do a cutback. Slightly deeper will involve slightly different bits as well. But that's probably for another time. I can ramble on for another hour about crossing.
As Eve just quickly says, well, very difficult to cross the pace. Watch Beckham was almost stationary when crossing, and De Bruyne from memory as well. Me and my ball from Quinn. Me and my ball from the moment they can. Me and my ball from the moment they can kick a ball for me doesn't help to create an all-round player who recognises sharing the ball is part of the game. Can they just switch to sharing at 13?
That's going to go back to the Reading stuff, which I don't necessarily want to comment too much on what Reading do because I don't 100% know anymore. But I think their point on it is that it's to create a technically brilliant player that you can then add the decision-making process to later. So no good adding a decision-making process to someone that can't dribble or can't pass. So they're trying to make sure that they can do it for themselves first, and then move from there. I hope that clears that up.
Andy says, best formation to encourage a team of dribblers. I suppose it would depend on the age, but...
Yeah, and I think that any formation is going to get it, isn't it? So, like, that's hopefully looked at the sort of myth of Busquets and Xavi and Iniesta. They'd have played in a 3 in midfield, brilliant dribblers. They'd have had dribblers on the outside of that 4-3-3. I think that it's about your playing and your coaching philosophy that you allow players to do it. I don't think that the formation makes too much of a difference.
Interesting. And I definitely would recommend that documentary that I think Asif mentioned earlier about is it Stay on the Ball Possible? I can't remember the name of it. The documentary on Sky about Barca's pet.
Oh yeah. Take the ball. Yeah.
Something like that. It's on Sky now. Definitely worth a watch. That was incredible. If there is no further questions, though, Mick, I just want to thank you again for taking the time out to do this. It's been fantastic.
Really
great
enjoyed
response from the guys, and thank you everyone as well for turning up this morning.